Do you have squeamish nightmares and call out to your mommy in the pitch black of our old bedroom, now yours alone? Do you watch those scary scenes in your mind of my nipples morphing into oversized and obese tardigrades, awakening and scurrying over to you so that they feast on the skin cells that you shed unconsciously? Scarlett Moore and the Hopeless Case of the Poltergeist. Wednesday started after another bad night of sleep. It left a darkness just beneath my eyes that highlighted every toss and turn and nightmare. I dressed in a full suit, black on black with a crisp white button-down and blue knitted tie. As I made the knot in the tie, it reminded me of the vision of Avila from the night before last, the lines of text being tied into a rope. I shivered at the thought. I dressed for my meeting with Roman, knowing that I needed to secure the necessary access to the weblogs in order to file the arrest warrant for the traveler. He was within my reach, almost too quickly. I tried to override each thought of jealousy that I once felt toward Roman as I prepared. I began to reason myself that even if he and Avila were together, it would actually be a blessing to me. Not only would it vindicate me, but I certainly would not want to be with her either. I tried to be the rational adult that was able to successfully investigate and conclude cases. I needed to be the professional version of myself that morning. I could afford no slip-ups as the result of my personal pains. When clearing my mind that morning, I started to realize that for as much as I had been focused on his role in the dissolution of my relationship with Avila, I didn't know much about Roman at all. I had only a vague mental image of this man who was the acid that etched and carved through the tenuous fibers of what had at one time been a fragile and blossoming love. After much delay, bordering on incompetence really, I made my way to the RF headquarters in a trendy corner of the old Wanamaker building. I had evaded this interaction for months because of my personal aversion to the man. And it was during that fated week that we were finally thrust into the same time and space. I navigated past the confused tourists, funneling out of Suburban Station, the gawkers who stopped to photograph City Hall, and shouldered my way through the brass-lined revolving door and over to the elevators. As I entered the offices of Romans Forum Inc., RF, I was surprised at the efficient use of space. For what was most certainly a small square footage, the offices looked spacious. It was chock full of genius millennials hyped on caffeine and coding. A receptionist took my name and offered me water before she picked up her phone to relay my presence. "A Mr. Hobbertson is here to see you." Her voice was small and liquid. "Agent Hobbertson," I corrected her in my mind. I didn't want to start out on the wrong foot. I was already more likely to slip up and say the wrong thing in front of Roman. I suddenly felt scrawny and perhaps too thin. The mental sewage of insecurity was beginning to bubble up. During my brisk walk to the RF office that morning, I had tried to think of the Phillies' current record, the potential SEPTA strike, anything and everything to keep my mind off the omnipresent topic that was devouring all of my errant thoughts. On my walk down Market Street, I focused on each piece of litter that I passed, eyeing the scraps of trash and discarded paper cups. I had actually begun to count them. The effect was very positive. I had a new resolution to volunteer for a city cleanup project, and I had successfully kept Avila from my thoughts for a decent duration of time. Sitting in that waiting area, though, there was very little to distract myself with. I couldn't stare at the office workers without appearing hostile or odd. I focused instead on my knuckles, but they weren't very interesting. Finally, the receptionist, with her tightly wound and pinned back strawberry blonde hair, called me to follow her to Mr. Trekky's office. She was the very picture of northern city women with her gray pencil skirt and black cardigan. I remained focused on the clean cut of the receptionist's clothes and the calm patterns on the Berber carpet to keep my mind distracted as I followed her. It seemed that with each step the suppressed thoughts were creeping in. You need to focus. Think of the case. Keep the details fresh in your mind. I thought about the specific request I needed to make, the impact it would have on the case, and preventing such egregious abuses and fraud from proliferating. Yes, proliferating. Use that word when Trekkie asked for a reason. I remember thinking that it would be such an excellent verb and that I would look more competent if I used it. As the receptionist reached for the door, I saw her delicate hands tap lightly on the wooden panel. Her light hair appeared darker for a moment, and my mind played the cruelest of jokes on me. As she began to turn around, I felt a cold sweat on my neck. My heart began to race, and I braced for impact. In that fraction of a second, I was positive that the receptionist had transformed into Avila. Her hair turning colors before my eyes, her skin draining of color and hue, and her teeth bared in a snarl. But this was a neurotic trick of my psyche. She was in fact still the receptionist. I must have had the look of death on my face. She patted me on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Trekkie is a nice man. Not like those other types of CEOs that you hear about. You'll do fine." With her sensitive grace, she was gone, and I was left with an ajar door in front of me and a mouth as dry as the Sahara Desert. I stepped into his office. It was small, but it had the illusion of space with a very Spartan design. There was the desk, metal and glass with some files on top of it, and a high-powered laptop hooked up to the multiple monitors. There were 2 wire-framed chairs in front of the desk and wide lanes on either side. The man behind the desk was turned away from me, looking at one of the drawers in the cabinet behind the desk. He was seated, and his twisted back gave him the illusion of a hunchback, which I will admit did give me a moment to disarm the man mentally. The morning sun was pouring into the room and gave everything a clean look, but there were still dust mites twirling and dancing in the errant rays of light. I had pictured him sitting in a cramped basement without any windows and heaps of files towering and spilling onto the floor. I should have expected more from the man who built such a powerful company, but you have to keep in mind that first impressions lie heavy on the brain. When I first heard mention of him, at that small party years ago, I pictured a starved and flailing entrepreneur. I wasn't prepared to face his professional success, especially when it compared to his successes in the case of our mutual love, I heard the sandpaper voice say. What? I responded without any thought, my tone cruel and quick. Had he just read my mind? "Hello?" Roman asked again. What I had heard was my own version of his parapraxis, what I hoped he would say to start the conversation that I wished would never happen. He was now facing me, and he was staring at me with his eyebrows raised. His expression posing the question, "Are you okay?" "Yes, hello," I snapped back into the reality of the moment. "Thank you for taking time to meet with me. I am Special Agent Hobbertson." I extended my arm to shake his hand. He cautiously leaned forward and reached his hand out. He didn't even get up out of his seat, which I took as a sign of his self-perceived superiority. He was indeed handsome, and looked about the same age he had when I looked him up on social media years before. He was tan with dark features. His forearms were visible and they were toned. Unconsciously, I covered my right forearm with my left hand. "Roman Trekkie, glad to be of service when the nation calls. How can I help you?" Roman sat with his arms folded in front of him. He quickly reached across and pressed the small button on his monitor, shutting off the display. He was either trying to hide something or trying to give me his undivided attention. I still can't be sure which it was. "Yes, as I explained to your receptionist yesterday," I went into the long explanation about the traveler, who I referred to as a suspect for the sake of appearing professional. I explained how he was manipulating the RF servers to hide his fraud. Roman nodded along and listened acutely. He scribbled a quick note on a small pad of paper next to his left hand. He held his pen the way a right-handed person would, but he wrote with his left. He didn't have the curved wrist movement and the dragging motion so prevalent among lefties. I was distracted by this observation as I came to the end of my explanation. In the brief moment where my monologue lapsed, Roman interjected. "So, you want to access the logs to get the evidence to accurately pinpoint this guy and prosecute him." He furrowed his brow and his arms were taut. His hairline was sharp and well-defined, but his short haircut was starting to reveal the slightest hint of gray pepper through his nondescript brown hair. Yes, that is exactly what I would like." I was pleased with his candid ability to grasp the concepts presented. "Well, you didn't need to meet with me to do that. You could have sent a warrant over to our security team." He looked at me as though he were interrogating me. Had he been equally dreading this meeting? Had he also scanned through my social feeds with trepidation that morning? I prefer to work on good faith with people. No one wants their system to be the one known for criminal activity. No one wants to see their company's name dragged through the mud. I find that asking for help is often the easiest option. Roman smiled and turned his head towards the window. He nodded his head and prepared to respond. His eyes narrowed in the direct sunlight, but he seemed to be coming to a decision of some kind. You realize that this puts me in a precarious situation. I was not expecting that. Was he referring to Avila? Was he about to delay the work of a federal agency over an ex-girlfriend? How so? I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to spell it out and put it on the line. Come on, Roman. Just admit that you and Avila are out to get me. You know, most of the people that use RF for their website are bloggers, small businesses, and generally good people. I want to cooperate with your investigation, but I also want to be sensitive to the general climate of distrust that surrounds the federal government and its agencies. Oh, that was a much more logical and valid reason. Of course, I responded, and nodded my head while I was trying to formulate a response. We don't want you to appear to be feeding your clients to the wolves, but keep in mind that the websites that are being used in this process likely have no idea that their pages are being manipulated. You are also helping those bloggers and small business owners when you help us. He held up his hand as though to stop me. I want to help you, Agent Hobbertson, but I thought about this yesterday. I am within my rights to refuse and request that you produce a warrant. This gives me a way to help you, but to also defer any suspicion that our policy is to just hand out information to the feds. I had to cut him some slack. He had thought out the request and anticipated my next moves. I reached into the breast pocket of my blazer and produced the warrant. I like to come prepared. I smiled congenially as I handed the document over to him. He read through the warrant and inspected the signature. He looked up from the document and smirked. His cheeks dimpled, and he let out a soft laugh. Excellent. I will ask Tracy to show you to our system team, and they can provide you with the exact information that you need. We would actually prefer if the data could be handed over via a portable hard drive. If we go to court, we will need to present the evidence and have it reviewed on multiple occasions. I can't just say, well, I saw the logs. Roman seemed to have taken that comment as a shock. Yeah, I guess that does make sense. He folded up the warrant and handed it back to me. I brought a clean portable drive with me as well. The thin but dense drive was in my left pants pocket. It was powerful and compact. It always seemed weird every time I had to mention that I happened to have a 2-terabyte hard drive in my pants. It never worked well as a joke. I really did have a hard drive in my pocket. Well, in this case, I may insist that you use one of our hard drives. Otherwise, you'll spend forever trying to get past the encryption. He reached around into one of the cabinets behind him. His torso was almost completely twisted around when he managed to palm the drive. He composed himself and handed it to me across the desk. Great. Thank you, Mr. Trekkie. I began to stand up. That wasn't so bad, I began to think to myself. But I also began to wonder if that was it? All of my mental anguish that week, and now a passive and easy interaction? Granted, Avila wasn't Roman. I couldn't blame him for her actions. But I had been so focused on her friendship with him that I had come to unilaterally associate him with our breakup. Call me Roman, he said kindly. This meeting was quicker than I thought it would be. I'll save Tracy the trip and introduce you to the team myself. I watched him as he reversed and wheeled himself around the desk. His unusual actions now made more sense. He didn't stand to shake my hand because he couldn't. I started to feel like the real jerk, able-bodied and secretly harboring a hatred of a man who was in a wheelchair. Then, I recalled one of the first things Avila ever said to me about him. We shared a common tragedy. That is a bond that isn't easily broken. I don't expect you to understand. Perhaps the injury that cost him his mobility was related to that tragedy. Roman must have caught my eyes as they followed the wheels on the chair. You should see the other guy, he uttered in an inconsequential manner. Oh, really? I was genuinely shocked by his comment, and somewhat embarrassed to be caught looking so directly at his wheels. Yeah, a 30-foot flat sheet of granite. My reaction must have been enough of an invitation to elaborate. Squirrel suit diving in Brazil earlier this year. The physical therapy isn't going well. I expect to be out of the chair in a month or so. Roman wheeled himself ahead of me and reversed, backing into the door of his office to push it open. Wow, that's pretty extreme. I was genuinely impressed, intrigued, and intimidated in equal parts. Yeah, I'm lucky to be alive and all that good stuff. I'm just so sick of this dang chair. Roman led me down the hallway past the reception area and to a small room. He rapped on the door, and a few moments later, a gawky young man appeared wide-eyed and skittish. Is this a test? He asked in a matter-of-fact tone. No, Jake, this isn't a test. I can't see the entire keypad to enter the code. It's okay, you can let me in. I estimated that Roman wasn't exaggerating. The keypad for this door was at an eye level for a standing adult. He might have been able to punch in the keys if he had memorized the code, but he would have risked fat-fingering the numbers. The young man, who Roman called Jake, looked at his boss through the thin glass in the door and then looked over to me. What about him? He's a federal agent. Roman's scratchy voice sounded gruff and firm. Oh, well, okay. The young man opened the door and allowed us both in. Jake, thank you, Roman said as he wheeled into the server room. Jake, I would like you to meet Agent Hobbertson with the FBI. Hello. Jake nodded and waited for further information from Roman. He pushed his glasses up on the bridge of his nose. I made a small gesture to begin to extend my hand, but quickly realized that Jake was not the type to shake hands. He was already back in his chair by the time Roman and I were past the doorframe. So, there was a windowless room after all, I thought as I scanned the layout of the space. Jake, Agent Hobbertson has a very specific warrant for information. We value our users' privacy here, but we don't want to be played for suckers if people are using our sites to commit fraud. Of course, Jake responded matter-of-factly. He pushed his glasses up on his nose again. It was obviously a nervous tic. They were practically flat against the bridge of his nose. Let's load the data in this warrant onto one of our portable drives, and then Agent Hobbertson can be on his way. Roman was instructing Jake like a schoolteacher. I became mildly suspicious about what information they might be hiding, but my realm was financial crimes. I wasn't going to start digging into other matters, especially given the glaring conflict of interest that I was avoiding. Yes, sir. Jake reached out his hand to me, wordlessly requesting the warrant. Within a few moments, all of the information I needed was loaded and ready to go. Jake handed over the external hard drive. It was still warm from the recent surge of data deposited into the block. Roman thanked Jake and left him to a secure room. The entire situation had been very transactional, as though this employee had actually been a robot, or a manifestation of the computer logs in human form. Jake appeared relieved to be left alone again. Some people just work better with machines. On the way back to reception, Roman explained that Jake was the only employee he trusted with the server data and that he took his job very seriously. As we reached the receptionist's desk, Roman said his farewell before wheeling himself back to his office. Tracy can assist you with anything else that you need. Hopefully you will be able to close your case now. Yes, thank you. I was standing with the hard drive. Diligent Tracy was sitting behind her desk, paying attention to the interaction with great detail. I stood there for a silent moment, trying to make sense of the mismatched emotions in my head. He was congenial and polite. But he must know who I am. Perhaps he doesn't care who Avila was with after they broke up. Perhaps he hasn't kept up with her at all. Or maybe they are still together, and they will have a laugh at my expense later this evening. I couldn't help but think how cruel Avila was. Is there anything else I can help you with, Mr. Hobbertson? Tracy asked. She was either ignorant of the proper address being agent, or she was intentionally trying to get under my skin. I was about to say, "No, I'm good," and walk out when I had a wicked little thought. I wonder what he's doing on Friday. Yes, actually. We usually can wrap up these technology-related cases pretty quickly. I'd like to be able to stop by and thank Mr. Trekkie for his help once we've made our arrest. Is he busy this Friday? He is in meetings all morning, and then he is leaving early for an event. Tracy didn't even need to glance at the screen. She had his schedule memorized. Oh well, I'll have to make a note to stop by on Monday then. I smiled, but I could sense that Tracy wasn't fooled by my farce. She returned a smile, but I could see that she was being polite by the way her eyes narrowed and evaluated me. Have a nice day, Mr. Hobbertson. She emphasized the Mr. with extra care. Thank you. I walked away before I could return a verbal barb and make myself look even more like a fool. The interaction with Roman had been easier than planned. I handed off the hard drive to our team that specialized in scrubbing data and securing it for evidence. All I had to do was wait for the final confirmation and filed the request for the arrest warrant. The traveler was in my sights. I filled in Director Knight, but left out the internal mental dialogue I had throughout the meeting with Roman Trekkie. Knight seemed pleased by my recounting of Roman's concerns over privacy and his insistence on a search warrant. What did I tell you? Always have the warrant as a backup. He gestured with his index finger as though he was pointing to the exact memory on an invisible string in his office. You sure did, I nodded, and let the man enjoy his moment to recount and retell the same lessons he had already verbalized. Knight was a man of nostalgia. He thrived on retelling the same anecdotes and stories over and over. I could tell that he rehearsed the timing and the pauses. No doubt this moment would end up becoming a lesson that he would verbally share with new agents. He would likely add on a few embellishments, no doubt. I was too anxious to eat as I waited for the final notification from the data team. I paced by the desk and then started to meticulously organize my files. I had a few bad guys to look into, but my focus was zeroed in on the man who had almost enough money to make a clean getaway. I had closed in on the traveler so easily. Maybe the traveler was trying to become incarcerated so that he could live off of the system permanently. Perhaps he was really looking to make off with a lifetime of free meals, cable TV, and endless free time to read. Stranger things have been recorded in FBI history. Finally, at 2 p.m., I heard the muted ping that indicated a new email had come into my Outlook inbox. I checked the results, and sure enough, Traveler was working out of a house in Seattle. I met with Knight immediately to coordinate an arrest with the Seattle field office. I filed the papers for an arrest warrant. I made extremely detailed notes that would be sent over to my counterpart on the West Coast. I did finally grab a sandwich as I waited for a response from the team in Seattle. We held a conference call at the end of the day and had everything coordinated for a quick arrest. Both Knight and I stressed the urgency of the matter and the potential flight risk of the suspect, given the amount of money that he had pilfered. Knight concluded the call and asked that we be kept up to date on the operation. The plan was for an early morning raid the following day. Early morning for the Seattle team meant normal time for us on the East Coast. We had a plan in place. I told Knight I would be in much earlier than usual to be able to handle any last-minute issues should they come up. It was well past 8 p.m. when I left the office. I was excited to know that we were so close to catching the traveler, but I felt the usual wave of worry knowing that there would be a few more hours where this man was free to steal again, and free to run. I made my way home along the dark streets of my city. I found a calm in the sounds of my footsteps along the pavement. Just mine alone. I took a longer route home and passed by Independence Mall, empty except for a few errant tourists snapping photos. The bell tower was lit impeccably, and the visitor center was quiet. As the others left the park, I could have fooled myself for a moment that I wasn't in a modern century. In the darkness, Philadelphia always looked so revolutionary. The evening was cool. Fall was on its way, and there was no amount of wishing or longing for summer that could stop it. I found my mind wandering to the long walks I had taken through the city. Usually I was going somewhere, always aiming for a specific destination. That night, I recalled the most aimless of my walks, the one that had served as my purgatory and my punishment. I still can't even remember exactly how that argument began all those years ago. It must have been like the others. In my memory, I had reviewed it so many times and tried to make sense of the order of who threw what words at each other and when, that I must have rearranged them at some point. I knew that I had been growing more and more jealous of the time Avila was spending without me, I was suspicious of her time with friends. Was she really with friends, or was she with Roman? She had called me out on my attempts to control who she was seeing and what she was doing with her time. I accused her of cheating. She accused me of being paranoid. In that moment, I was so overwhelmed with contempt, I felt that Avila's words had started to attack me. So I lost control. I snapped and hit her square in the jaw. Not with an open palm slap, but with a clenched fist. Avila absorbed the full force of it and stared at me, shocked and scared. Her skin instantly flashed red, and her eyes began to well with tears. Pain consumed her expression. I left right then, without a word. I wandered the city aimlessly throughout that night. Once dawn broke, I found a diner. I stayed until that afternoon when I found a bar. I didn't return to the scene of the last interaction, the scene of my crime, until it was evening again. As I expected and hoped, she was gone. That's right. I just left. I'm the bad guy all along. At least I was. I'm not a bad guy now, and I would never... I guess it doesn't matter what I say now. I'm condemned. By myself, by her, by you. Worst of all, her punishment will be slow, drawn out, and incredibly detailed. That's it. That is the root of the fear that was consuming me. I was waiting for her worst, her detailed and piercing cross-examination of my personality, my flaws, and my motives for being the guy that hit her. That is the reason why I was the perfect specimen for a revenge novel. I am the villain in her story. After all, the novel was titled Scarlet Avenged. It had to be my turn. It just had to be. When I had reached my apartment, I sat pensively on my couch, hunched over and finally being honest with myself. I knew that soon, once the book was released, the written character that was supposed to represent me would be hated by many. They will shake their heads as they read the details of my appearance, my walk, my swagger. The words would bleed before my eyes and stain my hands red like stamp ink as I'd read the passage that detailed what I did that evening. The violence and the cowardice. I never spoke to her again after that night. I knew that anything I could say would just sound cliché and would feel false on my tongue. I stayed silent. Might she have noticed that it was a penitent silence? Would Avila forgive my moment of rage and recognize the many good moments that we had had before that horrible night? I had stopped drinking for a time after our relationship ended. I was convinced that my fit of rage must have been sourced from a well of fire in my stomach. I stopped going out to bars where the music was loud and the lights were low. I could feel her presence there, following me, reverberating from the deep bass line. I spent a long time denying myself any entertainment or fun until, little by little, I broke back into my normal routines. The words from the Philadelphia Magazine interview rang fresh in my mind, emblazoned and empowered. Scarlet may be investigating paranormal activities, but it is always human errors that bring her back into this world. I wanted to focus on an issue that is important not just to women, but to society. We can't just say this is a woman's issue anymore. It's a human issue. Through Scarlet, I can bring this problem to the forefront of our consciousness and hopefully spur change. There could be no mistaking her words. My time was up. Avila was ready to disclose her true hatred for me and avenge herself through Scarlet. I closed my eyes that night as I tried to fall asleep. All I could see were those piercing green eyes from the poster. They were staring at me. Like Fitzgerald's oculist, her eyes could see all, silently passing judgment.